Measuring an electrical current requires a calibrated oscilloscope. Yet for thousands of years, humanity has attempted to deduce the nature of the universe while ignoring the physical calibration of the brain doing the deducing. The human brain functions as a specific biological device. Its capacities are defined by mechanical constraints, sampling rates, and the physical limits of its hardware. Classical philosophy, following Parmenides, assumed that human perception and thought provided a direct one-to-one map of absolute reality. Even the founders of modern physics struggled to abandon this assumption. When the data pointed toward a probabilistic universe, many elite scientists recoiled, favoring a static, unchanging ontology that was easier for the human mind to grasp. Albert Einstein famously resisted the probabilistic reality of quantum mechanics. His insistence that God does not play dice signaled a cognitive bias toward a definitive, unchanging reality that the human instrument could comfortably observe. Erwin Schrödinger faced a similar hurdle. Despite establishing the equations for quantum states, he remained more conceptually comfortable with a continuous, Parmenidean picture of reality than the bizarre operational truths emerging from the data. Attempting to define universal consciousness through introspection is equivalent to measuring quantum fields with a wooden ruler. The biological hardware simply lacks the resolution to capture the data. Our everyday spoken language operates as a primitive calculus. It is a system of survival-based symbols, not a tool for high-resolution physics. This primitive calculus fails when describing complex systems. Natural language lacks the precision to articulate subatomic superposition or the molecular flux of a neural membrane. Philosophical frameworks from Descartes to Kant were built entirely within the constraints of this limited linguistic system. Relying on innate ideas or internal reflection leads to a priori dead ends, where the limits of language are mistaken for the limits of the universe. Studying higher-order consciousness requires an operational shift. We must set aside natural language and focus on the mechanics of the instrument. This requires analyzing physical limits, the sampling rates of neurons, and the hierarchical layers of biological organization. Under this framework, the concept of a hidden god, Deus absconditus, resolves into a structural engineering problem of the human brain. We can only understand the possibility of higher-order systems by surrendering rationalist philosophy to empirical hardware analysis. This chart illustrates the integrative levels of organization, mapping how physical properties change across scales of complexity. Level 1 is the molecular level, where a GABA receptor changes shape to allow chloride ions into a cell, executing in microseconds. Level 2 is the cellular level. The aggregate movement of those ions creates an electrical pulse in the neuron. This cellular behavior is significantly slower, operating in milliseconds and maxing out at 1,000 pulses per second. A clear disparity exists between these scales. The molecular mechanism is orders of magnitude faster than the cellular behavior it enables. The neuron faces a physical bottleneck. Its total electrical output is throttled by the specific sampling rate of its constituent molecular receptors. These immutable physical speed limits govern the building blocks of human thought, dictating the boundaries of what the system can perceive. Level 3 is the organism. This is the level of macroscopic behavior, such as an animal freezing in response to a threat, a process that takes roughly half a second. Behaviorists like B.F. Skinner focused exclusively on this level, treating the underlying biological machinery as an irrelevant, inaccessible black box. This view is challenged by studying conditioned reflexes. Ivan Pavlov demonstrated that basic logic and learning are physically encoded into the nervous system's architecture. However, translating our behavioral concepts down to this physical architecture reveals a reduction paradox. Our linguistic labels often contradict the physical reality. Consider behavioral inhibition, the concept of an organism stopping in action. At the neurological level, for this stopping to occur, an inhibitory neural circuit must be aggressively excited. The natural language concept of inactivity is physically enacted by intense cellular activity. If basic linguistic categories like inhibition physically reverse the reality they describe, our conceptual labels for consciousness are too low resolution to map onto higher-order systems. Biologist Jakob von Uexküll described this limitation as the Umwelt, the restricted perceptual world specific to an organism's biological makeup. An organism detects a fraction of environmental signals, focusing on carriers relevant to survival, remaining blind to the rest of physical reality. This applies to the microscale as well. A single neuron has its own Umwelt, responding only to local chemical and electrical stimuli. Trapped in this sensory bubble, a neuron is physically incapable of perceiving the emergent brain it helps compose. This suggests a structural law. The lower components of a system are physically barred from perceiving the emergent whole. We have established a hierarchy of organization: the receptor, the neuron, and the organism. Using a comparative method, we can logically project this pattern beyond our own scale. To the molecular receptor, the entire neuron functions as a hidden, unknowable presence. To the single neuron, the functioning brain is equally inaccessible and imperceptible. The organizational trend line continues upward from the organism into a new tier, level 4. This tier represents a cognitive device with spatial dimensions and computational capacities dwarfing the human brain. By the principle of the Umwelt, this level 4 tier is structurally imperceptible to human instruments. The hiddenness of God is a consequence of our biological sampling rate. We are components attempting to view a whole operating on a larger scale. Philosophers historically filled this level 4 void with monas azouktos, the concept of an undifferentiated, static unity or absolute being. This definition remains an operational dead end. A static entity cannot be modeled as a functioning system or an evolving consciousness. A more viable operational target is monas azouktos, an evolving, contingent, higher-order cognitive device. This azouktos is not an independent prime mover. It is a system that depends entirely on the biological and physical layers operating beneath it. Its internal logic and concepts are vastly more abstract than our own, emerging from a complexity we cannot currently calculate. It operates on a spatial and temporal magnitude that encompasses our consciousness, yet its boundaries remain outside our sensory reach. The hiddenness of God is a consequence of human neural architecture. Our hardware cannot perceive the very system it helps constitute.